Good evening, and welcome to tonight's long and gentle story. This is a space for rest, for calm listening, for letting your thoughts drift like waves. As you settle in, tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. It is always soothing to know how far this story travels, across oceans, across time, to reach you. Tonight, we begin with a ship, and with a moment in time that was busy on the surface and calm underneath. The early years of the 20th century were a period of schedules and steam, polished brass and paper tickets, porters with caps, and cabins arranged by class. Travel was an orderly ritual. One boarded, one stowed luggage, one found a seat or a berth, and then one waited for the gentle shudder of departure. The ship we are thinking about was large for its day, long from bow to stern, high in decks and railings, built with steel plates joined by thousands of rivets, tightened by many hands. In the quiet of the shipyard in Belfast, months of hammering, measuring, riveting, and polishing had slowly changed raw pieces of metal into corridors and cabins, into stairways and saloons. There were dining rooms with tablecloths folded very precisely. There were carpets with repeating patterns that made the eye feel calm. There were light fixtures that glowed in a soft way. There were lifeboats resting in their places, as if they had always been there. All of this, assembled with lists and ledgers, and a careful attention to numbers, feet, and tons, and hours of work. Numbers that felt steady, numbers that felt inevitable. Now, we place ourselves at a harbor, Southampton, on a cool morning in April. There is the smell of coal smoke in the air. There is a faint salt taste from the sea. Gulls drift and cry and drift again. On the quay, there is movement, but not haste. Trunks are stacked, crates are labeled. Porters call to one another in voices that are practiced and even. Families stand in small circles, adjusting gloves, smoothing coats, murmuring reminders about letters and money and addresses to be written once they arrive. A band somewhere plays a tune that people know, not loudly, just enough to settle nerves and mark the hour. The ship's name is painted cleanly on lifebuoys and boarding signs. The funnels are tall, and the ropes, thick as a wrist, run to bollards on the pier. From time to time, steam releases in a gentle sigh, a reminder that heat and pressure are being kept in careful balance. We will meet two passengers, only gently for now. We will say their names in a quiet voice and leave them room to become familiar at an unhurried pace. Her name is Lydia Hart. She is traveling with an aunt and with a trunk that has brass corners and a small travel case for letters and a fountain pen. Lydia's coat is wool, a blue that looks almost gray in morning light. Her hat has a modest ribbon. Her gloves are light, kid leather, that creaks softly when she closes her hand. She reads the departure notice once, and then once again. Not because she doubts it, but because the act of reading is a way to pass the minutes. Her ticket is for a first-class cabin with a window that'll look out onto the water. She is not in a hurry to see it. She prefers to stand, to feel the air, to listen to the small sounds of a large ship preparing to leave. His name is Thomas Quinn. He has a third-class ticket and a small canvas bag tied with cord. There is a loaf of bread wrapped in paper. There is a knitted scarf, folded carefully, although the day is mild. Thomas stands in a line that moves, and then pauses, and then moves again. He watches the porters. He watches the ropes. He watches the steam. He is thinking about work and about letters he will write when he reaches the far side of the ocean. He is not thinking about luxury or menus or carpets. He is thinking about steady wages and the shape of a new street. He has not yet walked. Around them are many others, from many places, each with a reason that is simple when said aloud and complicated in the quiet of the heart. A family carries a small tin of biscuits, wrapped in cloth. A gentleman consults a pocket watch and then puts it away with a little nod to no one in particular. A child holds a wooden toy that has been mended so many times that the mending is now part of the toy. The ship's interior waits. In first class, there are public rooms with chairs that do not scrape when they are moved. Carpets soften footfalls. The air smells faintly of polish and of freshly laundered linen. A steward checks a list and then checks it again because a second look brings comfort. In second class, there are tidy cabins with narrow beds and hooks for coats. The hallway is bright, with light from small fixtures set into the wall. In third class, there are larger rooms with rows of bunks and little places to stow bags. The wood is plain, but clean. The metal rails are cool to the touch. Everywhere there is the sense of a new thing, ready to be used in the way it was intended. Lydia steps slowly along the gangway. When it is time, her aunt speaks in a soft voice about a letter to be posted from New York as soon as they arrive. Lydia nods and looks at the water where it gathers itself along the hull into small patterns that repeat and then fade. She thinks of the books she has packed, a volume of poems, a travel guide, a notebook with thick paper. She thinks of the dining saloon with its quiet arrangement of tables and the way a tablecloth falls in a straight line with a smooth corner. Thomas moves forward. When it is his turn, his ticket is examined and then returned. He touches the edge of it as if to confirm that the paper is real. He feels the incline of the gangway under his boots. He hears the low sound of the ship's heart, the deep machinery. Somewhere below, steady, and then steady again. In the third-class corridor, he counts doorways. He notices numbers painted in black, neat and simple. He chooses a bunk, the lower one, because it is closer to the floor and feels safe. He places his bag and sits for a moment, feeling the slight give of the mattress. He breathes, and the ship breathes, and for a while, the two rhythms are the same. On deck, stewards show passengers to lifeboat stations in a routine way, as part of the ordinary instructions given at the start of any crossing. There is no urgency in their voices. They point, they explain, they nod. A safety drill is another list to complete. Above them, the funnels are still, and then they are not, as heat and smoke find their path. The whistle sounds, long and low. It is a sound you feel in the ribs as much as here. People on the pier lift hands and handkerchiefs. People on the decks lift hands and hats. The heavy ropes are released, one by one, each rope giving up its curve as the distance grows. Lydia finds the promenade and stands at the rail. The air is cooler here, and it moves. She watches the shore rearrange itself into smaller shapes. A warehouse becomes a square. A chimney becomes a line. A person on the pier becomes a dot. And then not even a dot. She feels the ship's motion begin as a suggestion and then become a fact. It is not dramatic. It is simply movement, repeated, and then repeated again. Thomas, on another deck, also finds a rail. He keeps a small distance from the others, not from shyness, but from a habit of giving space. He leans his arms on the cool metal and studies the wake, the long white trail. The ship writes on the water. He listens to a language he does not speak, and then another that he does. He hears laughter and the clink of a cup against a saucer. He breathes, and the smell of coal is less now, replaced by salt and by the faint scent of paint that still feels new. Somewhere between these two places, the path of Lydia and the path of Thomas almost cross, but do not quite. They pass within a short distance of one another, separated by a bulkhead and a flight of steps and a matter of chance. It is enough for now to know that they are both here, on the same decks, under the same sky, listening to the same engines, measure the seconds in a low and even tone. As the harbor falls behind, the day arranges itself into simple parts. There is a bell for a meal. There are footsteps in the corridor. There is a steward's knock, polite, and then a pause. Menus are read, not quickly. Names are learned and forgotten and learned again. A rug is straightened. A window latch is tested. Small things becoming smaller. As the ship settles into her route, we may think, for a moment, about the systems that make such a vessel steady. Boilers, fed with coal, by men whose job is a rhythm of shovel and step and shovel and step. Water, turn to steam. Steam, turn to motion. Motion, turn to the turning of a propeller. And that turning, carried softly through all the steel, until even a cup on a saucer knows that the ship is alive. There are instruments for direction. There is a wireless set in a tidy room where operators will send messages, slowly tapping letters into the air. There are charts on a table with edges that do not curl because someone has cared to keep them flat. In the late afternoon, the light changes. It becomes less yellow and more blue. The water darkens, but does not threaten. A steward lights lamps, one by one, with the same motion each time. Lydia writes a note to her aunt, who is resting, about the color of the sea and the sound of the whistle and the way the carpet in the corridor has a pattern of leaves that repeat and then repeat again. Thomas folds the paper around the last of the bread and stores it in his bag. He counts his coins, not because anything depends on the number this minute, but because numbers make a person feel prepared. Night comes in a manner that is unsurprising. Darkness does what darkness does, which is arrive and cover things without haste. On deck, the air is cooler. A few stars appear, and then a few more. The ship continues at the speed that has been chosen by men who choose speeds for a living. It is a professional speed. It is a measured speed. Inside, the corridors are warm, and the rooms feel smaller in a comforting way. Doors close softly. Footsteps thin out. Lydia sits on the edge of her bed and smooths the coverlet with the flat of her hand. She thinks of the journey as a series of calm days and calm nights, measured by meals and by the sound of the sea. Against the hull, she places her notebook on the small table and sets her gloves beside it. Thomas lies back on his bunk and listens to the low murmur of voices on the other side of the wall. He learns the small creak above his head and decides it is a friendly sound. He closes his eyes and opens them and closes them again. The ship keeps time, so he does not need to. And so, our chapter rests here, with a harbor behind and open water ahead, with names that have been spoken softly and will be spoken again, with a ship that is new to the sea and passengers who are new to her. We will continue another night with the same slow voice and the same steady steps through corridors of steel and through ordinary hours that make a voyage feel like a long, gentle walk. The year was the early 1900s, a time of trains that clattered steadily across the countryside, a time of steamships that cut their measured way across the oceans, a time of hats and gloves and of polished boots that clicked softly on cobblestones. Society in Europe and in America was arranged in clear layers. There were the very wealthy, with houses in London or New York or Paris, houses filled with heavy curtains, with thick carpets, and with shelves of books that had been bound in leather. There were those of the middle sort, who worked in offices or in small shops, who wrote letters by hand and kept them folded in neat stacks, tied with ribbon. And there were those with very little, who worked in fields or in factories, who carried their tools home at the end of the day, who thought more about wages than about carpets or books. It was also a time of competition. Shipping lines were in a quiet race. The Cunard Line had built swift ships like the Lusitania and the Mauretania. They crossed the Atlantic in fewer days than others, and their speed was praised in newspapers, the way one might praise a horse or a train. The White Star Line answered differently. Speed was not their promise. Size and comfort would be their measure. Bigger ships, broader decks, dining rooms with space for hundreds, a smoking lounge, a reading room, a grand staircase. These would be the attractions. They would carry not only the wealthy, but also thousands of immigrants, people leaving Europe behind for the hope of a new beginning in America. It was in Belfast, in the Harland and Wolff shipyards, that the White Star Line's great ships took form. Men in flat caps and heavy boots worked with steel plates, each one lifted into place by towering cranes. The sound was steady, hammer against rivet, rivet against steel. The air smelled of smoke and of hot metal. Ships grew slowly, piece by piece, frame by frame. First, there was the keel, then the ribs, then the plates that closed the gaps. It was as if a skeleton became a body, and the body became a building, and the building, at last, became a ship. The Titanic was not alone. She was one of three. Sisters, they were called. The Olympic came first, then the Titanic, and then the Britannic. Each one was immense, each one was steady, but the Titanic would become the most remembered. Not because she was the largest by much, but because her story was not like the others. Before the Titanic ever touched water, her plans were drawn in ink, with precise lines, lines that measured decks, staterooms, dining halls. There were numbers everywhere, lengths in feet, widths in inches, tonnage in thousands, and beside the numbers were names of carpenters, of metal workers, of engineers, ordinary names, written in ledgers. It was the combined patience of these ordinary hands that gave the Titanic her shape. Society, at that time, adored progress. Electric lights were spreading in streets and in homes. Automobiles moved slowly along roads, astonishing some, annoying others. Telephones connected offices and families. And in the midst of this, great ships became symbols, symbols of modern life, symbols of nations that were moving forward. When the Titanic was launched into the water in May of 1911, there was no ceremony of champagne against her hull. The White Star Line preferred efficiency. A crowd gathered nonetheless, tens of thousands of eyes, watching as she slid down the ways, watching as the water welcomed her mass. The movement was steady, not hurried, a glide that was more like inevitability than surprise. Now, we return to our two passengers. For while all of this history is true, and while it gives shape to the ship, it is through the eyes of those aboard that we see details soften and become personal. Lydia Hart has left her coat neatly on a hook in her first-class cabin. She sits for a moment on the small sofa, running her hand across the fabric, which is firm yet comfortable. There is a vase on the table, not with flowers, but ready for them. There is a wardrobe with polished handles. She notices the electric lamp and the way its light is steady, unlike the flicker of gas lamps at home. She writes the date in her notebook, slowly, then closes the book again, as if the act of writing is enough to make the day real. Thomas Quinn, in his third-class quarters, adjusts the canvas bag at the foot of his bunk. The air is cool and smells faintly of paint. The bunks are arranged in tiers, the iron rails firm, the mattresses narrow. There is a small porthole that admits a circle of daylight, a reminder of the world outside. He folds his scarf carefully, placing it near his head, so it will be within reach when he wishes it. He listens to the shuffle of feet in the hallway. Voices speak in Irish, voices speaking Italian, voices speaking English. It is a chorus of people leaving and of people hoping. Neither Lydia nor Thomas knows of the other, yet. They are divided by decks, by class, by distance, and yet, both of them notice the ship. Both of them take comfort in small things: a folded scarf, a smooth coverlet, the sound of a door closing gently, the sight of water through glass. It is in these quiet attentions that their paths will one day cross, not through drama, not through haste, but through the ordinary, the repeated, the gentle motion of a ship at sea. As night falls, lamps are lit. In first class, they glow against mirrors. In third class, they glow against paint. The same light, in different settings, the same ship, carrying both. And outside, the sea stretches, steady and dark. This was the world before the Titanic's fame, a world that believed in progress, a world that believed in size and comfort, a world in which Lydia Hart smoothed the pages of her book and Thomas Quinn folded his scarf as the ship began her long journey west. And so, Chapter 2 closes, with society arranged in its layers, with a ship built to serve them, with the engines turning beneath the decks, and with two passengers, still strangers, yet carried gently forward on the same vast ocean. In Belfast, In the shipyards of Harland and Wolff, the air was filled with sound. Not the sound of music, not the sound of voices in a hall, but the slow, steady rhythm of industry. Hammers struck metal, again and again. The echo traveled through the frames of unfinished hulls, through scaffolding, through cranes that reached high into the sky. The Titanic did not arrive all at once. She was built in parts, in frames and in plates, in rivets and in bolts. The keel was laid first, a long line of steel that stretched across the ways. Workers in heavy boots placed the first plates against it, like bones being fitted to form a spine. From this spine, ribs were raised, one by one. They bent upward, then were fixed into place, until the outline of a hull became clear. Cranes stood above it all, like tall guardians. They turned slowly, lifting steel plates that were heavy enough to crush a man, and yet handled with calm skill. Chains rattled, hooks swung. The plates were guided into place with hand signals and with shouts that were practiced and steady. Riveters worked in pairs, one inside the frame, one outside. A red-hot rivet was passed quickly, from hand to hand. A hammer struck, then struck again. The head of the rivet and flattened into its final shape, locking steel to steel, plate to frame, thousands, then tens of thousands, then millions of rivets, each one small, each one ordinary, each one necessary. The sound of hammering was constant, not hurried, not frantic, just steady and repeating, like a heartbeat carried through the air. The numbers themselves tell a calm story: 882 feet in length, from bow to stern, 92 feet in width across the beam, over 46,000 tons of displacement, 3 propellers, 2 driven by reciprocating engines, 1 driven by a low-pressure turbine, 29 boilers feeding steam to the engines, 15 watertight bulkheads designed to contain water if the hull was breached. Each number exact, each number repeated in blueprints, in ledgers, in memory. The shipyards were busy with more than one vessel. Beside Titanic, her sister ship Olympic had already taken shape. Workers shifted from one to the other, steel to steel, rivet to rivet. The ships rose together, like siblings, born from the same hands, from the same tools. Imagine, for a moment, Lydia Hart hearing of these ships before she saw them. In the drawing rooms of London, or in the chatter of travelers, she would hear numbers. She would hear largest in the world. She would hear unsinkable. She would picture staircases that seemed endless, dining rooms with tall windows. In her imagination, the ship was already a palace, but she did not yet know the feel of its carpet beneath her shoes, the sound of its engines beneath her chair. Imagine also Thomas Quinn hearing of the same ship in a very different way. He would hear it mentioned in the yards of Belfast by men who worked there, men who carried the marks of steel dust on their clothes. He would hear it called steady, called strong, called a job that had lasted years. For him, Titanic was not a palace, but a vessel, a way forward, a chance for a new life. Not shining brass, but steady steel, both imagined, and yet both would soon learn, in their own quiet ways, that the ship was larger than imagination allowed. Inside the shipyard, scaffolding rose higher and higher as the hull grew. Planks and ladders crisscrossed the steel frame, allowing men to climb, to carry tools, to work in narrow spaces. The smell of hot tar, and of paint mixed with the salt air that drifted in from the harbor. Children watched from outside the yard, pressing faces against fences, trying to see the great shape take form. Their fathers and brothers and uncles disappeared each morning into the noise and returned each evening, shoulders heavy, voices hoarse, but with a quiet pride. The Titanic's funnels were raised into place, one after the other. 4 funnels in all, though only 3 were functional. The 4th was for symmetry, for appearance. Still, it was built with the same care. Tall cylinders, painted in colors chosen by the White Star Line, cream at the top, black at the mouth, buff along the length. They were visible for miles, even when the rest of the ship was only half formed. Decks were laid, plank by plank. Carpenters smoothed the wood, measuring carefully, sanding until the surface was even. Railings were set in place, metal polished until it reflected the pale Belfast sky. Cabins were framed, dining rooms outlined, staircases rising step by step. The grand staircase, with its carved oak and wrought iron, was planned to catch the eye and to comfort the wealthy. Below, simpler bunks and iron fittings were arranged with equal care for those who traveled in third class. The Titanic was not only an object of steel, but also of intention. She was meant to carry people, to carry hopes. The wealthy would cross in comfort. The poor would cross in search of work. And between them, the ship herself, steady and silent, connecting one shore to another. As Lydia would later step into her cabin, she would think, perhaps for a moment, about all of this effort, about the men who hammered rivets, about the scaffolds and cranes. She would not know their names, but she would sense their presence in every polished surface, in every line of the ship. As Thomas would place his bag on its bunk, he too might think, briefly, of the work. He would notice the smell of paint, still fresh. He would touch the iron railing, still cool. He would feel that the ship was new, that it had only recently been handed from the workers to the passengers. He would feel, without saying it, that he was part of something larger than himself. The day of launch came at last. May 31st, 1911. The yard was crowded. Over 100,000 people gathered, standing shoulder to shoulder, to watch the ship slide into the water. Flags hung still in the calm air. At noon, the signal was given. The timbers beneath the hull were knocked away. The Titanic moved, slowly at first, then faster, guided by chains and anchors. Into the harbor she went, her mast displacing the water, sending ripples against the quays. There was no champagne bottle broken, no ceremony of christening. White Star preferred efficiency, quiet procedure, and so the ship slid into her element, steady and sure, as if she had always belonged there. From that day, fitting out began. Engines were installed, interiors were completed, furniture was carried aboard, polished and placed. Curtains were hung, carpets unrolled. Every detail was checked, then checked again. And so, the ship that Lydia imagined as a palace and that Thomas imagined as a vessel was finished, ready for her voyage, ready to carry them both on parallel paths, paths that would one day intersect. This chapter rests in the sound of hammering that has grown quiet, in the cranes that have lowered their last loads, in the rivets that no longer glow red, but hold their places, cold and firm. The Titanic is built. She waits at her pier, and soon she will gather her passengers for the journey west. The morning air was cool and pale as the passengers began to gather. There was a quiet hum of voices, a rustle of clothing, the shifting of trunks on wooden carts. The Titanic stood, steady and tall, her sides rising like walls of steel, her funnels stretching upward. People looked up, and then looked again, to take in the size. Porters moved slowly, carrying luggage, cases tied with rope, trunks with brass corners, baskets covered in cloth. Some bags were polished leather, shining faintly. Others were canvas, worn but dependable. Each piece of luggage carried a story of its own, a story of what was packed and what was left behind. Tickets were checked, one by one. Stewards in neat uniforms examined papers, clipped corners, directed passengers to their places. First-class tickets, with bold print, led to the upper gangways. Third-class tickets, smaller in size, led to another entrance below. Each passenger followed the path marked for them, steady footsteps on wooden boards, the sound echoing in the morning stillness. The gangways creaked softly as people crossed. Some hesitated to look back at the shore. Others moved forward quickly, eager to find their cabins. The ship's whistle sounded once, a long, low note, like a reminder that time itself was moving. Inside, the air was different, cooler, quieter, carrying the faint smell of new paint, of polished wood, of linen that had just been pressed. The corridors stretched ahead, long and straight, lined with doors and lamps. The floor was firm beneath the feet, the carpets muffling each step, turning sound into softness. Lydia's first impressions. Lydia Hart stepped carefully, following her aunt and a steward. Her gloves brushed against the polished rail as they climbed a short staircase. The steward carried her smaller case and pointed outdoors in a polite monotone. At last, they arrived at her cabin. The steward opened the door with a simple motion. Inside, the space was calm. A bed with white sheets folded neatly, a sofa upholstered in patterned fabric, a small writing desk with paper and ink set ready. On the wall, a lamp glowed softly, steady and warm. Lydia stepped inside and looked slowly around. Her hand touched the coverlet, smooth and firm. She opened a wardrobe and found hangers waiting. She looked at the curtains, heavy and pale, falling in even folds. Each detail was ordinary, yet arranged with care. Her aunt spoke about unpacking, but Lydia lingered at the window. The view showed the harbor, the masts of smaller ships, the faint movement of gulls. She breathed slowly and thought of the days ahead. Meals in the dining saloon, walks along the promenade, evenings with music in the lounge. She imagined each one, not in excitement, but in calm expectation, as if the voyage was a gentle routine already begun. On the desk, a menu was placed, printed neatly. It listed soups, fish, roasts, puddings. The names were long, French words mingled with English. Lydia read each line carefully, not because she was hungry, but because the act of reading was steadying. She thought of the tablecloths that would be spread, the silver cutlery, the folded napkins. She thought of the murmur of voices, the quiet clink of cups and spoons. Thomas's first impressions far below. Thomas Quinn followed another steward along another corridor. The air was cooler here and smelled faintly of fresh paint and of iron. The passageway was narrower, the walls plain, the lamps smaller. but the space was clean and orderly. The steward pointed to a cabin door, with a number painted simply in black. Thomas stepped inside. The room was shared, with several bunks along the walls. Each bunk had a mattress, a pillow, and a folded blanket. There was a small wash basin with a jug of water. Hooks were fixed to the wall for coats or bags. The floor was bare wood, swept and plain. Thomas placed his canvas bag on a lower bunk. He touched the blanket, rougher than at home, but clean. He set his loaf of bread on the shelf near his head. He folded his scarf carefully and placed it within reach. He breathed slowly, listening to the sounds of footsteps in the corridor, voices speaking in many accents. From a small porthole, light entered. The view was narrow, just a circle of harbor water, with ripples moving quietly. Thomas looked at it for a long time, as if the small window was enough to remind him of the sea outside. He thought of the days ahead, plain meals in the common dining room, perhaps music from a fiddle, or a song sung softly. He thought of the long crossing and the letters he would write when he reached America. Corridors and routines around them. The ship was settling. Stewards moved with purpose, showing passengers to cabins, lifting trunks, answering questions. Voices were low, calm, practiced. Doors opened and closed again. Suitcases were placed at the foot of beds. Clothes were shaken out and hung. In the first-class dining saloon, tables were being set. White cloths stretched smooth, corners folded sharply, plates arranged in precise lines, cutlery placed in order, knife, fork, spoon. Glasses stood waiting, clear and polished. Menus were placed at each setting. In third class, the dining area was simpler. Long tables with benches, plates stacked neatly, cups ready. The smell of soup drifted faintly, reminding passengers that meals would be steady and filling. Children peered at the tables, running their hands along the wood. Mothers smoothed their hair and reminded them to wait. The Titanic was a place of layers, luxuries above, simplicity below, but everywhere there was order. Everywhere there was routine, a hint of romance. Though Lydia and Thomas had not met, their paths moved closer. Lydia walked along the promenade deck, her steps soft against the carpeted floor. She looked out over the harbor, the water reflecting a pale light. Thomas walked along a lower deck, his boots sounding against bare boards. He too looked outward, through his narrow porthole, at the same water, the same pale light. They were separated by distance, by class, by walls of steel. And yet, they were carried forward together. Both noticed the air, the smell of salt and smoke. Both noticed the sound, the whistle that marked the hours. Both thought of the voyage, not as adventure, but as passage, a steady crossing that would bring them nearer to something unnamed. Settling in, as the afternoon wore on, the ship's movement grew faintly noticeable. A vibration beneath the floor, a low hum in the walls. Passengers paused to feel it. Some smiled, some frowned, some simply continued unpacking. Lydia placed her books on the small table, arranging them in a neat stack. She smoothed her gloves and set them beside her notebook. She adjusted her hat and placed it carefully on the wardrobe shelf. Each act was small, but gave the cabin a sense of belonging. Thomas tied his bag more tightly and slid it beneath the bunk. He pressed the blanket flat with his hand. He tapped the edge of the shelf, making sure it would hold. He sat for a moment, on the mattress, listening to the footsteps outside, and then stood again, to look once more through the porthole. Evening came slowly. The lamps glowed in corridors. The dining rooms filled with soft voices. Cutlery clicked against plates. The ship moved steadily into the open sea. Lydia lifted her fork and tasted soup that was warm and light. Thomas lifted his spoon and tasted stew that was plain and filling. 2 meals, different in setting, but both steady, both part of the same ship's routine. And as night settled, the ship carried them both through calm waters, under a darkening sky, toward the days to come. Morning on the Titanic arrived not suddenly, but with a quiet sequence. The light entered the tall windows, soft at first, then a little stronger. The ship moved steadily. The hum of its engines carried through the walls like a distant clock that never stopped. In the first-class cabins, stewards knocked softly, offering tea and a kind word to begin the day. Lydia Hart rose slowly. She pressed her hand against the cool fabric of the curtain before drawing it aside. The view was water, stretching outward, pale blue beneath the light. The horizon was even, calm. She breathed and heard only the faintest creak of the ship as it adjusted to the sea. Breakfast in the dining saloon. The first-class dining saloon was a large space. Rows of tables stretched across the room, covered with cloths as white as snow. Each table was set carefully, fork to the left, knife to the right, spoon above the plate. The napkins were folded into shapes, precise and symmetrical. Glasses stood at attention, clear and polished, waiting for juice or for water. The chairs were upholstered, firm but comfortable. When passengers moved them, they made only the faintest sound, a soft scrape muffled by carpet. Stewards moved among the tables, quietly, pouring tea, offering toast, carrying silver trays. Lydia sat with her aunt at a table near the center of the room. She noticed the pattern on the carpet beneath her feet, repeating leaves that curled in gentle shapes. She noticed the cutlery shining under the lamplight, reflecting her hand as she lifted the spoon. The porridge was warm, plain, but pleasant. The tea was fragrant, poured in a thin stream from a silver pot. Around her, voices murmured, not loud, never loud. Passengers spoke in polite tones about the weather, about letters to be written, about the calmness of the sea. There was no haste in their words. Each sentence lingered, then settled. Promenades on deck after breakfast. Many passengers walked the promenade. The deck stretched long and straight, with railings polished smooth. The boards beneath the feet were firm, arranged in neat lines. The air was cool, carrying the scent of salt. Ladies wore coats and broad hats tied with ribbons, gloves on their hands, scarves at their necks. Gentlemen wore overcoats and hats tilted slightly. Some carried canes, more for appearance than for use. Lydia stepped onto the promenade, her gloved hand resting briefly on the railing. She walked slowly beside her aunt, watching the sea slip past. Other passengers moved in the same rhythm, not hurried, not slow, simply steady. A few children laughed, their voices carried quickly by the wind, but even their laughter softened against the width of the deck. The benches along the wall invited pauses. Some passengers sat with blankets over their laps, reading newspapers or gazing outward. Stewards passed occasionally, offering a cushion or adjusting the blanket with practiced hands. Lydia paused at a bench. She adjusted her coat, smoothed her gloves, and opened her notebook. She wrote only a line or two, simple words about the calmness of the morning. Then she closed the book and returned it to her bag. The act of writing was more important than the words themselves. Lounges and reading rooms. Inside the ship, there were lounges, rooms with carved wood panels, with tall windows, with chairs arranged in careful groups. The air smelled faintly of polish, of fabric, of books. In the reading and writing room, ladies sat with pens in hand. Letters were composed slowly, each word chosen with care. The scratching of pen on paper was a soft background sound. Envelopes were folded, sealed, stacked neatly for posting. In the lounge, men read newspapers, holding them wide. The rustle of pages, deliberate and slow. Some played cards, speaking little, moving pieces of paper across the table. The click of a watch being opened. The clearing of a throat. The sound of a chair leg shifting. All were small, steady notes in the quiet room. Lydia wandered through these spaces. She trailed her gloved fingers along the smooth wood of a table, felt the curve of the carved armrest of a chair. She noticed the lamps, with their shades turned downward, casting pools of gentle light. She thought of how many people had touched these same chairs, and how many more would do so in voyages yet to come. She sat by a window, opening her notebook once more. She wrote a few sentences about the furniture, the stillness, the shape of the lampshades. She paused, tapped the pen against the paper, and then wrote again. The act of noticing was restful. The act of repeating was calming. In the afternoon, tea was served. Tables were set once more, smaller this time, but still precise. Plates of small cakes, thin sandwiches, biscuits arranged in circles, the napkins folded, the cups aligned. The silver spoons gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Stewards poured tea from tall pots. The stream was narrow, the sound light, a soft trickle into porcelain cups. The milk was added second, a drop at a time. Sugar cubes clinked gently as they dissolved. Lydia sipped her tea slowly, tasting warmth, sweetness, the faintest hint of leaves. Her aunt spoke of letters again, and of plans for New York. Lydia listened, nodded, but her thoughts drifted. She looked at the other tables, at the couples who spoke in quiet voices, at the families gathered in circles. She wondered, who among them would she see again in New York? Polite conversations. In the corridors and on the decks, conversations continued, always polite. Passengers asked about the sea, about the speed of the ship, about the meals served. They spoke of their homes, their gardens, their families. The tone was calm, never hurried. Questions were answered with nods, with measured words. Lydia spoke with another lady about the color of the curtains in her cabin. They agreed the fabric was fine, heavy, and smooth, pleasing to the eye. She spoke with a gentleman about the weather on the Atlantic. He assured her that April crossings were steady, though one could never be certain. Lydia smiled politely and thought of the horizon, wide and unbroken. Gentle, romantic hints. And yet, somewhere in her thoughts, Lydia felt a faint curiosity, not sharp, not urgent, only a soft wondering. She had seen a face once, a man boarding, with a canvas bag tied in cord. She had not looked long, she had not spoken, but the image remained, as if pressed lightly into memory. At the same time, Thomas, in his plain cabin, thought of the upper decks he would never enter. He wondered, what it might be like to sit at a table with silver cutlery, with folded napkins, with porcelain cups. He wondered if the lady he glimpsed on the gangway had already taken her place at such a table. It was not longing, not yet, only a quiet thought that lingered. Evening on the promenade. As the day drew toward evening, lamps glowed softly along the promenade. The air was cooler now, the sea darker. Passengers walked slowly, coats drawn closer, scarves pulled tighter. Some stopped at the rail, watching the wake trail behind the ship, white against the dark water. Lydia walked again, her steps even, her eyes tracing the line of the horizon. She paused once to listen to the sound of the water against the hull. It was steady, rhythmic, like breathing. She thought of her notebook, waiting in her cabin. She thought of her books, waiting to be read. And she thought faintly of the stranger with the canvas bag. Inside, the dining saloon was being prepared again. Tables laid, menus placed. The ship continued, at its steady pace, through the evening and into the night. And Lydia, part of the calm world of first class, found herself both present in the routines around her and quietly touched by a thought of something not yet known. Morning in third class arrived with small sounds. A latch lifted, a boot touched the floor. Someone cleared a quiet throat. The ship hummed as always, a soft and steady note that never rose and never fell. Light entered through a round porthole. A pale coin of day laid gently on the wall. Thomas Quinn opened his eyes and let them rest on the circle of light. He did not hurry to sit up. He listened first to the corridor, to a voice passing, to another voice answering. He felt the narrow mattress under his shoulder, felt the blanket's roughness on his arm. In this place, hundreds of small routines made a kind of order. Wake, fold, rinse, lace, button, breathe, then do it again. The next day, and the next. He swung his feet to the floor and touched the bag he had tied with cord. The knot was still firm. The loaf of bread, wrapped in paper, was smaller now, but present. He folded the scarf once more, though it did not need folding. Folding was another routine that made the morning behave. The shared washroom was cool and smelled faintly of soap. Water trickled into enamel basins, clear and patient. Men stood in a line, not quite a line, more a quiet agreement about whose turn it was. A towel hung from a rail, a little damp, but clean. Buttons fastened, collars smoothed, hair flattened with water, then with a palm. No one spoke loudly. No one needed to. The corridor, on E deck, or F, or G, depending on the turn, was narrow and plain. Its lamps were small, but bright enough. The floorboards were honest wood, swept each day, with the same strokes, in the same order. Numbers painted in black kept track of the doors. The numbers did their job, calmly. They did not ask to be admired. Breakfast came as a bell, a small metal sound, struck by a steward, who looked as if he had rung that bell many times before. In the third-class dining saloon, long tables waited, with benches that shone faintly where hands had polished them, without meaning to. The room was larger than Thomas expected, a kind of plain hall with white plates stacked at the end of each table, cups beside them, and spoons in small bundles. Steam drifted from the galley hatch, carrying the smell of porridge and tea and toasted bread. Families sat together. Fathers lifted cups. Mothers wiped small faces with a cloth. Children swung their legs and practiced being patient. Young men, traveling alone, found a corner and nodded to one another in the gentle way strangers do when their journeys are similar. A fiddle case rested under one bench, quiet for now. A tin of sweets appeared at another table, shared in a careful way, one small piece each. Thomas took a place at the end of a bench. A steward set a bowl in front of him, porridge that held its shape, with a little pool of milk. A spoon followed, then a cup of tea, the color of amber, the steam rising in a thin ribbon. He ate without speaking, without haste. He noticed the grain in the wood, the scrape mark where a plate had worn a circle, the way the spoon's handle cooled the skin of his fingers. He felt, with each swallow, that he was part of something measured. Food, for strength. Tea, for warmth. A table, for belonging. When the meal was done, the plates were stacked, the cups gathered, the benches pushed back with the same soft scrape. Nothing announced itself. It simply happened, as it had happened yesterday, and would happen tomorrow. There was time then for walking. Third-class passengers had their own deck, their own air. The sea, seen from here, was not less beautiful. It was simply seen through another rail, against another part of the hull. Thomas leaned on the metal, cool under his forearms, and watched the wake, writing its white sentence on the dark page of water. He listened to a young boy recite the names of ships he had seen, his mother nodding at each one, as if each ship was a cousin. Music, sometimes, began before noon. A fiddle brought out of its case, a concertina with a sigh of bellows, a song that many knew, sung in more than one accent, in more than one key, but always with its tune, intact. Feet tapped, a heel, marked time, laughter, rose, and fell, like the sea itself. The song ended, not with applause, but with a contented silence and a few soft words about another song. Later, cabins remained plain and steady, bunks in rows, a shelf for a bag, hooks for coats, a porthole if one was fortunate, a memory of daylight if not. Children napped, on laps or on blankets spread on the lower bunks. A woman mended a shirt, the needle rising and falling, like a small metronome. A man wrote a letter, slowly, printing each word, so that the reader would not mistake his meaning. Thomas read over a postcard, the same words again and again, until they felt sufficient. He did not post it yet. Holding it was its own meaning. At midday, another bell, another meal, soup with barley, potatoes, cut in neat pieces, a slice of meat, with its gravy trained to stay where it belonged. Bread, always bread. Tea again, because tea was a kind of anchor. The children were quieter now, hunger having stepped back. Stories were told about farms and factories and streets made of stone that shone when it rained. No story lasted long. Each folded itself away, so the next could open. There were rooms set aside for sitting, a general room where families gathered, where laundry was folded, where a lullaby was tried and adjusted to suit the sway of the ship. A smoking room where men sat with pipes and planned futures made of wages and small rented rooms and the pride of sending money home. The ceilings were not high, but high enough. The light was not grand, but sufficient. The chairs were not upholstered, but they held. Plainness was the style, cleanliness the decoration. Now and then, a thought from above reached below, a rumor of the band playing on the upper deck, with their polished instruments, with a march that was not loud, yet traveled. The faint scent of something sweet from a first-class dessert, arriving in third class, only as an idea. A woman described a glimpse of a lady in a wide hat seen through an open stairwell, a hat like a small garden, held in place with pins. Thomas listened and pictured the hat and the steady tilt of its brim. He did not know the lady's name. He did not need to. The picture was enough, and it softened something quiet in him. Afternoon passed. In small tasks, shoes were brushed, shirts were shaken. A child's toy, a wooden horse on wheels, was repaired with a piece of string, looped twice, then once more. To be sure, a deck of cards appeared. A hand was dealt, then gathered, then dealt again. No one played for money, only for the ticking of minutes, until the bell called them to tea, or to nothing at all. Outside, the air cooled. A scarf was useful now. Thomas lifted his to his neck and tied it with the same knot he always used. He watched the horizon and thought it was good that it did not move. He thought of the city he would find, and the letters he would write, and the street where his boots would learn a new sound. He wondered, without urgency, about the woman with the hat, about her cabin, about her books, about whether she also looked at the horizon and preferred it steady. Evening made lamps of the corridors. Voices grew softer. A hymn began, low, in the general room. Not a service, exactly. Not a plan. Just a few voices, choosing the same notes and letting them ring. Thomas did not sing. He listened and felt the tune, put his thoughts in order, the way a comb puts hair in place. Supper was simple, stew that had waited all day, becoming itself. Bread again, tea again, a sweet at the end, a spoon of jam, a custard in a shallow dish. Enough. The talk was easier now, because the day had been lived, and there was less to decide. A father spoke of county, Clare, a mother of Naples, a boy of a dog he had seen in Queenstown. Each listened to the other, as if each story came from a neighbor. Later, the fiddle returned. A reel tried itself, then settled into a slower air. Two couples turned in a small space, not because there was room, but because there was willingness. A baby slept on a shawl. A man tapped a spoon against his cup, keeping time that needed no keeping. When the tune was done, the room exhaled, and the silence was warm. Night asked for bunks, and people obeyed. Thomas laid his scarf within reach. He placed the postcard under the strap of his bag, the printed side down, the blank side up, as if the words would arrive. While he slept, he lay back and counted nothing. Counting was not needed when the ship counted for him. The hum, the faint creak, the soft thud somewhere far, all agreed on a number and kept it. Above him, in another world of carpets and shades and table lamps with beaded fringes, Lydia Hart closed a book. Her lamp made a small circle of light on cream paper. She thought of the promenade, of the sound of the band, of tea poured in a thin line. She did not know that a scarf had been tied below in the same minute, with the same simplicity. She did not know that a postcard lay blank, waiting for words that would be ordinary and therefore important. But she felt, in the way a person feels the weather, that there were others carried beside her by the same engines at the same measured speed. The ship remained the ship. Steel, steam, water pressed aside to make a road. Third class, slept in its plainness. First class rested in its softness. Between them, bulkheads and stairways, maps and rules, and the impartial truth of distance. And yet, the distance did not argue. It simply existed, as calm as the sea. Thomas turned once, and the bunk agreed to hold him. Somewhere above, a page turned. Somewhere ahead, a bell marked the hour. The Titanic continued her long sentence. Across the Atlantic page, every letter the same size, every line the same width, written by engines that did not raise their voices. And in this quiet, the day in third class folded itself away. Shared meals, stacked dishes, music that remembered home, cabins that asked for sleep, small routines laid out for tomorrow, like clothes on a chair. A plain world, but not a lesser one. A steady world, where a man like Thomas could feel the future, arriving very slowly, like morning light, through a round porthole. Morning again, and the ship kept her time. Somewhere, a bell marked the half hour. Then another bell marked the hour. The watch on the bridge changed, boots crossing the planked deck above. Quietly, down below, in the stokehold, men shoveled coal. Shovel, step, shovel, step. The rhythm unchanged. Between those places, passengers drifted, in corridors and along rails, with thoughts that were their own, and footsteps that matched the ship's even motion. Lydia Hart walked a measured path from her cabin to the writing room. Her notebook lay open to a blank page, and she liked the way the page received the light. As she passed a landing, she heard music, a fragment only. A tune from the band that practiced near the lounge, a waltz, but played softly, as if the notes were wrapped in cloth. She paused, then continued, because pausing and continuing were the two calm choices of a morning. On a deck below, Thomas Quinn also moved along a passage. The lamps were steady. The paint was fresh. The numbers on the doors were clear and black. A steward with a stack of towels nodded to him. The same nod as yesterday. The same nod as tomorrow. Thomas nodded back and felt that a nod could be a greeting and also a promise that the day would behave. There are places on a great ship where one life glimpses another without speaking. A stairwell with an open grating. A companionway that meets a door marked private. A length of rail that looks upon another length of rail. Not far, and yet not near. Here, the classes were arranged, by plan and by rule. First, then second, then third. But sound travels more freely than people do, and sometimes light allows a face to be kept, like a pressed leaf, in memory. It was near such a stair that Lydia first noticed him, not as a person with a name, but as a shape, at ease within a plain coat. He stood at a lower landing, steady, as if he had decided to be still for a moment. He looked upward, not to call, only to consider the slice of sky cut into a rectangle by the stair. Lydia saw the set of his shoulders, the cloth of a scarf, the patient way he let others pass. Then the band resumed, a few careful notes, and her feet carried her onward. The moment stayed, a small square of quiet, folded into the day. Thomas's glimpse came later, along a boundary rail, where a sign hung, politely instructing those who read it to remain to their own side. He was not close. He did not step closer. There was no need. Across that small distance, he saw a woman in a blue-gray coat, her hat simple, her gloves light. She did not look toward him. She looked out, to the line where sea became sky. In that long line, he recognized something of himself, the wish to let the mind rest upon a shape that did not change. He knew only that she saw as he did, in small, calm ways. The routines of the ship continued around them. On the bridge, the quartermaster held the wheel, hands steady at the spokes. The officer of the watch checked the compass, checked the log, wrote neat figures in a book. In the engine rooms, gauges rose and fell within narrow bands, water and steam in their circuits, obeying pipes and valves and men who listened with practiced ears. At the Marconi wireless set, 2 operators traded shifts, tapping out messages, receiving others. The clicks and taps like rain, passing through wire, into air. Above, in the foremast, the lookouts kept their place in the little wooden box, eyes watering in the cold, then clearing, then watering again, scanning left, scanning right, and then front, in the old pattern that keeps patients occupied. Lydia paused in the writing room, where the air smelled faintly of paper and ink. A postcard lay waiting, embossed with the ship's crest. She wrote one sentence, then another, slow as breathing. Not about the great size of the ship, not about the engines and their promise, but about small things. The way the table's edge was rounded, the way the lamp's shade directed light downward, the way the carpet did not make a sound, even when a chair moved. She stopped and listened to footsteps in the corridor and thought she heard those same patient steps she had noticed near the stair. She closed the pen and smiled without meaning to. Smiles can be as quiet as a lamplight. Thomas stood by a door that opened to the well deck, where third-class passengers found air and room to stand. He rested his hands on the paint-smoothed rail. Children counted waves. A man with a concertina tested a button, not to play, only to be sure the air moved the way he liked. From somewhere above, the ship's band drifted down, a few notes only, like pieces of thread, falling through grating. Thomas lifted his head, just a little. The tune was a waltz, the same one that had passed Lydia's ear. He did not know its title. He knew only that it moved in threes, and that threes are friendly numbers. The ship's design offered many such cross. In the afternoon, a lifeboat drill was mentioned. Stewards pointed to stations. Passengers stood in small groups, as if waiting for a photograph to be taken. Ropes creaked. Davits swung a little. Names were ticked on lists. No alarm, only the method of a method. Thomas stood with others on his deck, hands in pockets, listening without anxiety. Lydia stood with her aunt, gloves buttoned, hat pin secure, listening to the same instructions, spoken in another voice, with the same practiced tone. The sea was cold, the air brisk, and the drill concluded, as drills conclude, with a soft breaking into movement, people returning to their rooms and to their tea. Near the dinner hour, service began its unhurried dance. Down long corridors, stewards moved with trays, plates warmed, dishes domed. Up from pantries rose the scent of soup, of roasted meats, of fresh bread that had yielded to a knife with a fine edge. In first class, the menu sang its formal list, in French and English, and Lydia read it, the way one reads a poem, not to hurry to the end, but to feel the weight of each line. In third class, the list was shorter, the names were plain, and Thomas found comfort in knowing exactly what each word promised. Between those decks, the same ship carried both, with the same engines, with the same roll, with the same low hum, in the same evening light. Their next almost meeting came as the day leaned into dusk. Lydia walked a sheltered stretch of promenade where glass protected the path from wind. She paused by a door that had been propped for a delivery of something small, perhaps linens, perhaps flowers in a crate. The door opened to a service stair, a narrow column downward, with a square of colder air rising up. For a moment, a figure appeared, a man in a plain coat, carrying nothing at all, only himself. He looked briefly toward the rectangle of sky beyond Lydia's shoulder, not at her. And yet, the line of his glance brushed the space she occupied. She felt the brush, as one feels the lightest edge of a breeze. He moved on, with a nod to his steward, and the door settled back to its usual stillness. Thomas did not expect to see her again, and did not consent to think of it. He meant to think of work, and of streets with straight edges, and of tools that lay well in the hand. Yet in the quiet between 1 minute and the next, he would find himself recalling the blue-gray of a coat, the way a hat brim drew a careful line above thoughtful eyes. He did not add romance to such thoughts. He added only stillness, as if stillness were the safest place to keep a picture. Night extended itself in a tidy way. Stars appeared, the brighter first, then the lesser, as eyes adjusted. On the bridge, a new officer took the watch and signed the log with a neat hand. In the boiler rooms, trimmers shifted coal from bunker to passage, passage to fireman's shovel, shovel to furnace, the orange light opening, closing, opening again. Mail clerks, in the sorting room, pushed sacks along a rack, letters tapping against one another, like whispers. In the pantry, a junior steward counted cups, and then counted again, because counting is a kind of lullaby that never goes out of fashion. Lydia returned to her cabin and found that a steward had straightened the coverlet with that careful square tug that makes cloth obey. She set her notebook on the table, opened it, and wrote fewer words than she had planned. A line about the band, a line about the stair, a line that read, "I saw a patient's scarf." She did not explain it, even to herself. Explaining might change it. She closed the book and touched the lamp switch, feeling the click. Small, sufficient. Thomas lay in his bunk and listened for the 2 or 3 sounds he had adopted as markers of rest. A pipe somewhere, letting go a little pressure. A footfall, timed with his breath. A far-off door, agreeing to close. He pictured a horizon, then a blue-gray sleeve, then the horizon again, allowing the two to trade places until both felt simple. And so the day, with its tiny crossings, folded its corners. They had not spoken. They had not exchanged names. They had only shared a ship's routine, a ship's design, a ship's air. But the shapes of one life had reached the edge of the other, as sound does, as light does, as music does, traveling where rules cannot. Tomorrow would look much the same. Bells and watches, tea and soup, letters and lists, rails and stairs. And in that sameness, romance would do its slow work, not in declarations, not in vows, but in the repeatable acts of noticing and noticing again, until noticing became a kind of love. The evening of April 14th arrived without ceremony. The ship moved, as she had moved all the days before, steady, deliberate, unhurried. The air was cooler now, cooler than the nights before, carrying a sharp edge that made coats and scarves more welcome. The sea itself was calm, so calm that some said it seemed like glass. Not a ripple, not a swell, only a flatness, stretching out in every direction. Above, the sky was wide and dark and filled with stars. The stars shone clearly, brighter than in any city, their light reflecting faintly on the still water. Passengers who stepped onto the promenade lifted their eyes and spoke softly about constellations, about the long line of the horizon, about the chill that touched their faces. Some walked slowly, arm in arm, their footsteps softened by carpeted paths, their voices hushed by the immensity of the night. Inside, the dining saloons were alive with quiet routines, tables set with folded napkins, silver cutlery shining in lamplight, porcelain cups arranged in order. Stewards moved gently, carrying trays, pouring soup, setting dishes in place. In first class, the menus listed roasts, delicate pastries, wines chosen with care. Conversations rose and fell, polite and measured, about the voyage, about homes left behind, about places still ahead. Lydia sat with her aunt and lifted her spoon slowly, tasting each bite as if it were part of the evening itself. She noticed the pattern of the china, the smoothness of the linen beneath her hand, the faint reflection of light on the glass beside her. She listened, not to words alone, but to the rhythm of voices, each phrase unhurried, each pause filled by the hum of the ship. She felt a stillness, not troubling, only curious, as if the ship herself were listening. In third class, the dining room was simpler but steady. Soup in deep bowls, bread placed in stacks, tea poured once more. Families sat close, voices mingling in many tongues. Laughter here, a lullaby there. Thomas lifted his spoon and thought of how familiar the motions were, how a ship could be so large, and yet supper could feel like supper at home. When he finished, he sat a moment longer, listening to a young man hum a tune, while another tapped lightly on the table. He thought of the calm outside and decided he would walk the deck. Above all this, in the wireless room, two men tapped keys, one message, then another again. Some were personal, sent by passengers to families on shore. Some were official, reports of ice ahead, positions marked by latitude and longitude. The operators recorded them, passed them along, folded them into the stream of signals. The air outside was silent, but the airwaves were busy, words moving unseen, from ship to shore, from ship to ship. Later, Lydia stepped onto the promenade. She pulled her coat close, breathed the cold air, and looked upward. Thomas, on another deck below, did the same. Both paused at the rail. Both noticed the sharpness of the air. Both noticed the stillness of the sea. They did not see one another. They did not speak. But they shared the same night, the same glassy calm, the same endless stars, a stillness so complete that it pressed itself gently into memory. The night remained still, the sea flat, the stars countless. The ship moved forward, her engine steady, her bow cutting through water that gave no protest. At 11:40 p.m., a sound came, not loud, not violent, more a long scrape, a sigh against the steel. A faint vibration ran through the decks, as if the ship had brushed her hand along the side of something ancient. Some passengers did not notice at all. Some felt the tremor and paused, and then continued. In a few cabins, drawers slid open a fraction. glasses on shelves rattled faintly, and then were still again. It was not the sound of breaking. It was the sound of contact. Steel meeting ice. Sharp edges of frozen ridges. Pressing. Scratching. Moving on. High in the crow's nest, the lookouts had seen the shape. Dark. Against a darker sky. They rang the bell 3 times. The bridge received the call. Orders were given. Hands at the wheel. Engines reversed. But the ship was large, and the sea was small beneath her, and motion continued as it must. The iceberg slipped along the starboard side, leaving marks unseen, except by those below. In the forward compartments, water began its work. A trickle first, then a rush. Cold water, clear and heavy, sliding over steel, filling the lowest spaces. Boiler rooms felt the change. Men moved quickly, but not in panic. Watertight doors were closed, levers pulled, steel plates lowering into grooves with a mechanical thud. The compartments were divided, one from another, each meant to hold its water, each meant to limit the flood. Yet the sea pressed forward, compartment to compartment, finding the seams, filling the spaces. On the upper decks, officers walked quietly. They checked doors. They spoke in low voices. They asked stewards to wake passengers, gently, not with alarm, but with reminders. Put on your coat. Bring your life belt. Come to the boat deck. In first class, Lydia Hart felt the pause. Her lamp swayed faintly, though the ship itself was still. Her aunt asked, "Was it anything?" And Lydia answered softly that it seemed only a momentary touch. Still, they dressed. Gloves pulled on, hats adjusted, coats buttoned. The corridor outside was calm. People stepping out of rooms, speaking in whispers, unsure but unhurried. In third class, Thomas Quinn also felt the sound. A scrape, then a stop. He sat on his bunk, listening. Voices in many accents asked the same question. Was it serious? Was it nothing? A steward came, asking them to move upward. Thomas reached for his scarf, tied it as always, lifted his bag. He stepped into the corridor, following the others. The lamps glowed steady. The ship still hummed, as if nothing had changed. On deck, the cold air was sharper now. Passengers gathered in coats and blankets. Some smiled, uncertain. Some frowned, listening for sounds they could not hear. The lifeboats hung in their davits, canvas covers pulled back, ropes checked. Crewmen moved quietly, testing pulleys, speaking to one another with nods. The boats were numbered, each in its place, each ready if needed. Lydia stood with her aunt, close to the rail. She watched her breath form in the air and disappear. She looked at the sea, still calm, stars still reflected. Nothing in sight, except the cold itself. She felt the strangeness, that something might be wrong, though nothing looked different. Thomas stood farther aft, among families and men with caps pulled low. He too looked outward. The iceberg was gone, left behind. Only the memory of its presence remained. He tightened his scarf and thought of the hours ahead, whether they returned to cabins or whether they waited. He would not hurry his thoughts. Officers moved among the people, offering reassurances, giving instructions. Stewards carried blankets. Children were held closer. Mothers whispering calm words. Fathers pointing toward the boats, only to say they were there, if required. The ship did not list. She did not stagger. She seemed as steady as before. And yet below, the water rose. It moved across floors, into compartments, into storage spaces. Coal bunkers filled. Mailbags grew heavy. The bow pressed lower, but only by inches, too small to notice, unless one measured with care. The wireless room grew busier. Operators tapped messages, sending calls to nearby ships. "Come quickly. We have struck ice." Their voices did not carry, only the tapping, a rhythm into the night. Some ships answered, some did not. The air was crowded with words unseen. And so, in this calm way, the collision was absorbed into the ship's story. No alarms rang, no voices shouted, only the slow spreading of cold water below, the measured checking of ropes above, and the gentle gathering of passengers on deck. Lydia and Thomas, in different places, felt the same stillness. Both breathed the same sharp air. Both looked at the same stars. Both waited, not yet knowing, but sensing that the night had changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but in a quiet way that would not be undone. Morning came, not to the Titanic, but to small boats on a wide sea. The Carpathia, steady and patient, gathered survivors one by one. Blankets were wrapped, hands were warmed, tea was poured, names were spoken, then written down, carefully, so none would be lost. In London and in New York, inquiries were held, questions asked, questions answered. How many lifeboats? How fast the ship had gone? What warnings had been received? Papers filled with numbers, with times, with testimonies spoken in even voices. The story became a record, and the record became history. Years passed, decades passed. The Titanic remained below, silent, a shape of steel among silt and salt. Her legacy rose instead, in safety rules, in ships that carried more boats, in radios kept watch through the night. And of Lydia and Thomas, their story settled gently into memory. Not loud, not tragic, but tender. Two lives that touched, in small ways, upon a great ship, noticing and noticing again, until noticing itself became love. Now the ocean holds them both, in story if not in sight. And history rests with them, calm, repeating, like the tide itself, a lullaby for all who listen. And so, our quiet journey comes to its close. The ship rests in memory, and we too may rest. If you are still awake, share in the comments where you listened from, so this story may connect us all like small lights across the night. Until the next voyage, sleep well and dream gently.